Our journey begins at the city's edge. Here, beneath a haze of suspended light and drifting particles, we encounter a lone traveler, the first sign that this strange place can, in fact, be crossed. They stand calmly within a tangle of living tissue and embedded machinery, where fleshy tendrils rise like twisted columns and metal tubing arcs overhead like forgotten street lamps. The walls pulse faintly, alive with hidden circulation. Wires glimmer like veins of copper. It is both street and bloodstream, both architecture and anatomy. Clothed in a simple gray shell, the traveler carries no tools, no weapons, only the markings of a forgotten cartography etched across their brow. They do not speak. Their marked gaze, etched with memory or map, is invitation enough. Step forward, follow, and see what lies within the city where the biological and the mechanical are indistinguishable. They came after her. Not in pursuit, but in recognition. Drawn by the pulse of the terrain, by the glow of vascular corridors and the memory of her marked gaze. Each carried a shell of protection, a pack of tools, a quiet question: could this place be crossed? Could it be understood? The tendrils rose around them like cathedral columns, pink-lit and breathing. The air shimmered with suspended particles, as if the city itself were exhaling. They did not speak. They observed. They listened. They waited for the terrain to respond. And somewhere beneath the roots, the archive stirred. They moved deeper. Past the outer tendrils, beyond the city's edge, into the folds of something older, something alive. The terrain shifted. No longer streets and columns, but lobes and pathways, like the inside of a dreaming brain. The walls glowed with vascular light, red and orange, pulsing in slow rhythm. Each step felt like a heartbeat. They did not speak. They walked in silence, backpacks heavy with tools they no longer understood. This was not a place to fix. It was a place to feel. And somewhere in the folds, the memory of the lone traveler still lingered, etched into the tissue, waiting to be found. They reached the core. Not a chamber, not a vault, but a living mass, grotesque and luminous. It pulsed with red light, thick as blood, casting shadows across the tendrils that reached like limbs from a dreaming body. The terrain was no longer metaphor. It was organ. A heart, a brain, a wound. The travelers stood scattered, small against the vastness, their suits reflecting the glow of something ancient and unfinished. This was not a place to map. It was a place to reckon with. And somewhere inside the mass, the memory of the lone traveler still burned, fused into the tissue, waiting to be named. They continued on. Not as explorers, but as carriers, each step a rhythm, each breath a calibration. The terrain narrowed into corridors of red tissue and glowing veins, winding like arteries through a living architecture. Small lights blinked from embedded nodes, suggesting habitation, memory, or surveillance. The travelers walked in silence, their presence absorbed into the folds. This was no longer a journey outward. It was a passage inward. The archive was not a place. It was a body. And they were inside it. They found life. Not hostile, not hidden, just waiting. Small translucent forms, glowing softly, moved through the tissue like memories made flesh. The travelers knelt, reached out, unsure whether to touch or simply witness. These were not guardians. Not guides. Just fragments of something older, perhaps the archive's dreams, perhaps its grief. The terrain pulsed gently around them, as if watching. And for a moment, the mission dissolved. There was no data to collect, no path to follow. Only presence. Inside the body of the city, they were no longer explorers. They were guests. They emerged into a wide chamber, neither cathedral nor lab, but something in between. The walls curved like neural folds, glowing with red nodes that pulsed in quiet rhythm. Figures moved slowly, dressed not for conquest but for communion. Their clothing was modern, but their posture was ancient, heads tilted, hands open, eyes wide. This was not a place to study. It was a place to remember. The terrain no longer resisted. It welcomed. It showed them its pathways, its scars, its soft circuits of grief. And in that moment, the archive was no longer a mystery. It was a mirror. They had not entered it. They had always been inside. They walked the red path. Not toward a destination, but through a memory. The terrain had narrowed into a single glowing artery, winding through soft tissue and pulsing nodes. Each figure moved with quiet reverence, as if rehearsing a ritual they had never been taught but somehow remembered. The walls shimmered with embedded signals, part biological, part technological, all testimonial. This was not a corridor. It was a procession. And the archive, now fully awake, watched them pass like blood through its dreaming body. They were no longer guests. They were part of the anatomy. They had entered the city, but not its surface. These were the inner chambers, where architecture folds into anatomy, and memory flows through engineered veins. The pathway beneath them was structured, metallic, but the walls pulsed with soft tissue and embedded light. Each corridor felt like a thought, half-formed, half-remembered. The explorers moved slowly, sinking their breath to the rhythm of the terrain. Above them, the ceiling arched like a spinal vault. Around them, the city whispered in vascular signals. This was not arrival. This was immersion. And somewhere ahead, the open air waited, where the archive would unfold into sky. They emerged into the outskirts. The tunnels behind them pulsed quietly, fading into memory as the city opened in color and sound. Canopies fluttered like soft tissue, strung between coral arches and vascular spires. The air was warm, fragrant with spores and signal. Vendors stood beneath glowing fruit, their stalls woven from tendrils and filament. This was not a marketplace. It was a circulatory plaza, where memory was traded, and breath became currency. The explorers paused, not to gather data, but to witness. The city had begun. And it was alive. The city opened in layers. Vein-wrapped buildings curved like organs, their surfaces soft and fibrous, pulsing with ambient light. The street was paved, but not with stone, with structured tissue, warm underfoot and threaded with signal. Canopies stretched between tendrils, shading stalls that offered fruit, filament, and memory. The explorers walked among residents who no longer noticed the architecture's breath. Above them, a cathedral-like spire rose, not for worship, but for calibration. This was not a city of spectacle. It was a city of function, where anatomy became infrastructure, and ritual became routine. They did not speak. They observed. And the city, sensing their presence, adjusted its rhythm. They entered a quieter district. The structures here curved inward, soft and fibrous, like lungs exhaling memory. Tendrils arched overhead, forming vaulted corridors lit from within, each bulbous chamber glowing with warm signal. Residents moved slowly, not out of weariness, but rhythm. The city breathed here. The explorers walked the arterial path, their steps syncing with the pulse beneath them. Above, spire towers rose like vertebrae, anchoring the district's cadence. This was not a place of arrival. It was a place of continuation. And the city, sensing their presence, adjusted its breath. The terrain softened. Structures curved like coral, branching into open chambers and bulbous vaults that glowed with quiet breath. The ground beneath them shimmered with cellular patterning, as if the city's skin had become a map. Animals moved freely, small, furred, and unbothered by the architecture's pulse. The explorers paused. This district felt different. Less engineered. More lived. Here, the biomechanical city did not assert itself. It coexisted. And in the quiet between tendrils, the archive whispered, "Not all memory is human." They entered a district shaped by coexistence. The ground beneath them pulsed with soft patterning, like cellular memory woven into stone. Creatures moved through the tendrils, furred, bulbous, blue-spored, unbothered by the architecture's breath. The explorers ascended quiet platforms, not to dominate, but to observe. This was not a place of spectacle. It was a place of rhythm. The city did not speak here. It listened. And in the silence between movements, the archive whispered, "Memory is shared." This fragment holds the tone of gentle reverence, a moment where the city's emotional infrastructure expands beyond human cadence. You could layer soft ambient textures, creature murmurs, and distant pulses to evoke the atmosphere. They entered the vault. The chamber rose around them, veins thick as towers, mesh glowing like suspended breath. Creatures perched along the tendrils, silent and watching, their bodies textured with memory. The explorers moved slowly, dwarfed by the scale, careful not to disturb the rhythm. This was not a district. It was a body. And the body was aware. Each step echoed through the chamber, triggering pulses in the mesh and shifts in the creature's gaze. The city did not welcome them. It acknowledged them. And in that acknowledgement, the archive whispered, "You are inside something that remembers itself." The path narrowed, then widened into a chamber of convergence. Veins twisted overhead like thought forms, branching into neural vaults and bulbous memory nodes. The terrain pulsed with layered breath, red tendrils, soft vascular folds, and suspended mesh that shimmered with signal. The explorers moved slowly, dwarfed by the scale, careful not to disturb the rhythm. This was not a place of passage. It was a place of recognition. The city had gathered itself here, its breath, its memory, its gaze. And in the stillness, the archive whispered, "You are inside the moment before knowing." They emerged into the vertical district. Structures rose like vascular towers, their surfaces soft and undulating, cascading into the streets like folds of memory. Balconies and staircases were embedded within the tissue, not built but grown, each one calibrated to breath and rhythm. The streets pulsed with movement. Residents walked without urgency, their paths shaped by the city's internal logic. The explorers paused. This was not a city overtaken by biology. It was a city that had chosen it. And in the quiet between footsteps, the archive whispered, "You are inside a decision." They entered the neural district. Structures rose like hemispheres, textured with folds and ridges, connected by red pathways that pulsed with signal. The terrain was not built. It was remembered. Each tendril, each bulbous vault, echoed with stored breath, decisions, ruptures, calibrations. The explorers walked slowly, sensing the shift. This was not a place of habitation. It was a place of cognition. The city was thinking here. And in the quiet between pulses, the archive whispered, "You are walking through memory." They emerged into the grove. Roots twisted like dendrites, glowing orbs pulsed with signal, each one a breath of thought, a flicker of memory. The path beneath them shimmered, lit from within by electrical cadence. Residents moved gently through the terrain, their steps calibrated to the rhythm of firing synapses. This was not a city of walls. It was a city of transmission. And the travelers, now immersed, felt the shift. They were no longer observers. They were part of the signal. And in the quiet between pulses, the archive whispered, "Memory lives here." The grove gave way to a dense vascular district. Tendrils twisted into corridors, roots braided into passageways, and the terrain shimmered with residual signal. Above it all rose the spire, green-roofed, cylindrical, and pulsing faintly with thought. The explorers moved carefully, tracing the pathways like veins, each step syncing with the city's breath. This was not a place of memory. It was a place of governance. Here, the biomechanical city did not reflect. It decided. And in the quiet beneath the spire, the archive whispered, "Cognition becomes structure." They crossed the bridge. It hung in a vast chamber, suspended by sinew and intention, fleshy, undulating, alive. Beneath them, the city's connective tissue pulsed softly, stitching one district to the next. The walls shimmered with anatomical memory, each fold a record of passage, each curve a breath of transition. The explorers moved slowly, sensing the shift. This was not a bridge between places. It was a bridge between states. And in the silence of suspension, the archive whispered, "Integration is movement." Beyond the bridge, the terrain deepened. Veins thickened into conduits, tendrils arced with latent charge, and the air pulsed with pre-signal tension. The travelers stood at the mouth of the chamber, a cavernous vault glowing red from within, its walls lined with embedded nodes. This was not a place of passage. It was a place of ignition. Here, the biomechanical city did not remember. It fired. And as they stepped forward, the archive whispered, "Thought becomes voltage." The terrain thickened into a confluence of thought. Veins arced across the chamber like declarations, bulbous nodes pulsed with stored emotion, and the air shimmered with residual cognition. The travelers moved slowly, not from caution, but from recognition. This was not unfamiliar. It was reflective. Each tendril mirrored a memory. Each pulse echoed a decision. They felt their own minds rise to meet the terrain, synapses firing in tandem, emotions surfacing like signals. And in the hush between pulses, the archive whispered, "You are walking through yourself." They entered the limbic passage. The terrain folded inward, veins braided into bridges, tissues swelled with stored emotion, and the air thickened with biological memory. The travelers stood suspended between chambers, their thoughts echoing through the vascular vaults. This was not a place of logic. It was a place of feeling. The city did not speak here. It remembered viscerally. And as they moved forward, the archive whispered, "Instinct is architecture." They entered the convergence district. Veins thickened into cables, roots braided through machinery, and the terrain pulsed with directive tension. The travelers walked the winding path, sensing the shift. This was no longer anatomy. It was architecture of intent. The city's thoughts had hardened here, crystallized into industrial form. Each step echoed with stored decisions, each structure hummed with unresolved signal. And in the hush between pulses, the archive whispered, "Cognition becomes infrastructure." They arrived at the plaza. The terrain opened into a circular vault, its walls folded like muscle, its scaffolds gleaming with embedded signal. At the center stood the dome, part observatory, part archive, part ritual node. The travelers paused. This was not a place of passage. It was a place of witnessing. Here, the biomechanical city did not fire or reflect. It remembered publicly. Each fold held a decision. Each tower marked a rupture. And as they stepped into the plaza, the archive whispered, "Memory must be seen." They stood beneath the node. Its tendrils reached outward, not to grasp, but to remember. The city pulsed gently, no longer guiding, no longer deciding, only witnessing. The travelers did not speak. Their breath aligned with the infrastructure. Each step they had taken, each chamber crossed, each rupture metabolized, now folded into the city's rhythm. They were no longer explorers. They were signal. And as the node dimmed, the archive whispered, "Containment is completion." You have seen enough. You are part of the signal. The traversal ends. The memory remains.